Sandton was a world of wealth, high walls, expensive alarms, and glass towers shining in the sun. Right next door was Alexandra, where broken houses and poverty painted a very different picture. The two places were neighbors, but lived in opposite worlds. Behind Sandton's fences, people felt safe, but they didn't know who was watching from the shadows. The ones planning to break in weren't strangers from far away. They were boys from next door. In Alexandra, the streets didn't offer dreams. They offered lessons in survival. Every corner taught pain, and every alley whispered of hunger. One of the boys walking these alleys was William. He didn't dream of changing Alexandra. He dreamed of breaking Sandton. William was born into the noise and dust of Alex, where life was hard before it even began. His home had no shine, no comfort, just thin walls and cold nights. He went to school like other kids, but his eyes watched the kids who had more. One day, he took a pen from another student's bag. It wasn't worth much, but it gave him a feeling of power. When he was caught, he was beaten, but he didn't stop. William wasn't like other kids. The pain didn't scare him. It made him want more. Each act of theft made him feel bigger in a world that kept making him feel small. He started believing that if the world wouldn't give him power, he'd take it. At first, his crimes were small. A phone left on a table, a wallet dropped on the ground. But William wasn't stealing for fun. He was studying. He watched how people moved, where they kept things, and how long it took for them to notice. With each risk, he grew bolder. He learned to vanish before anyone even knew he was there. Soon, his name started moving around the streets. Older boys noticed him, not for being loud, but for always coming back from a job untouched. He didn't act wild. He was calm, smart, and dangerous. He didn't run with a big group. He watched in silence, planning his next move like a chess player. That's when he met the brothers. The four brothers weren't related by blood, but by purpose. They had grown up in the same dirt and smoke, and their eyes held the same fire. They didn't just want money, they wanted fear. They wanted Sandton to look over its shoulder. When William met them, he didn't just see allies, he saw soldiers. Together, they formed something darker. They called themselves the Knife Gang. No guns, just blades and boldness. They didn't want attention. They wanted results. They worked in silence, but every job echoed across both towns. William became the leader, not because he asked, but because the others followed him. He had a way of moving through walls and plans like a shadow. When they robbed a house, they didn't just break in. They studied the guards, watched the lights, timed the alarms, then they struck. The group moved through Sandton like ghosts. Behind gates, inside mansions, they searched every room, cutting into safes, drawers, closets. They used kitchen knives, not guns, so they left behind no shots, no noise. Victims were tied before they could scream. The gang left only silence and fear. Each robbery made them stronger. They didn't just steal items, they stole peace. In Sandton, even the rich began to feel poor. No wall was high enough. No alarm was loud enough. The Knife Gang had turned safety into a lie. But it all began in the back streets of Alex, in a boy who was beaten but never broken, in a gang of young men who saw crime not as evil, but as a way out. Behind every headline, behind every broken lock, there was a mind. William's mind, cold, sharp, calculated. The Knife Gang wasn't just a group of thugs. They were a machine, built in silence, fueled by bitterness, and aimed straight at the heart of Sandton. And William, the boy who stole a pen, had now stolen fear itself. Sandton was meant to be untouchable. With its tall walls, electric fences, and private security patrols, it stood like a fortress beside Alexandra's crumbling edges. But one night changed everything. A shadow slipped through a weak point in a high-end complex. That shadow left behind no sound, no prints, only silence and fear. This wasn't an accident. The Knife Gang had a method. They used no guns, only blades. No alarms were triggered. No cameras caught a face. They moved in barefoot, often shirtless. Ghosts in the night, guided only by moonlight and hunger. Their first big hit was like a movie scene. They had watched the building for days, waited for the night security guard to take a routine break. Once inside, they used knives from the kitchen drawer. Families were tied with ropes, eyes wide as they watched their jewelry, laptops, and cash vanish in minutes. When the sun rose, Sandton was in shock. Police found no broken locks, no tools left behind. Even the ropes were taken. No one could explain how the intruders had come and gone without leaving a single piece of evidence. Fear spread like fire. But the gang didn't stop. The opposite happened. They became bolder. On some nights, they hit 3 houses before dawn. One minute, they were in a home by the golf estate. Minutes later, across the road, another alarm blared. They worked fast, always in and out before security arrived. Residents couldn't sleep. Rich families hired private guards to stay on site. Security companies doubled patrols. Some homes added motion sensors, dogs, even panic rooms. But still, the attacks continued. The knife gang was always one step ahead. They seemed to know the layout of every house, every schedule, every weak spot. Whispers started filling the air. People said the gang could become invisible. Some claimed they had inside help. Others believed they were trained by ex-soldiers. None of it was true. What was true was this: they were just boys from Alex, poor, angry, and clever. In Alexandra, the gang's legend grew. Kids spoke their names like heroes. They saw them walk the same streets by day, unnoticed by cops, then vanish by night. In schools, some boys imitated their style, bandanas over their faces, rusted knives in their bags. The knife gang had become more than criminals. They were symbols. But symbols leave scars. The victims were never the same. One woman, tied up with her husband beside her kids, said she still hears the silence of that night. Another man, robbed twice, sold his house and left the country. These were not random crimes. They were carefully planned invasions that shattered lives. Each crime added fuel to the panic. Police checkpoints popped up around Sandton. Helicopters hovered late at night. The city, once calm and rich, was now tense and restless. Yet the gang kept moving. Every time they struck, they vanished again. The press gave them new names: the Phantom Gang, the Blade Boys. But the truth was simpler. They were just a group of smart, ruthless teens. They knew the gap between the rich and poor was wide, and they used it. They didn't rob for fun. They robbed to dominate. In every home they hit, they left a message: even the richest aren't safe. Their victims weren't chosen randomly. They picked homes with the best tech, the strongest locks, and the most to lose. They weren't afraid. They were proud. Each successful job was a badge of honor. Sandton had never seen anything like it. Gangs had always existed, but not like this. Not this focused, not this silent, not this surgical. These boys were rewriting the rules of urban crime, and no one could stop them. Behind the fear and upgrades, one thing became clear. Sandton, with all its money, couldn't keep the danger out. And Alexandra, with all its struggle, had just sent a message that echoed through every polished street and marble hallway. A storm had arrived, and it didn't need thunder to make itself known. Just knives, shadows, and silence. In August 2005, something happened that shook the nation. The deputy president of South Africa's home was robbed while his family slept. Security was tight, alarm systems, private guards, and surveillance cameras. But despite all of that, the gang bypassed every layer of protection. They didn't break down doors, and they left no witnesses. In a few short minutes, the house was emptied of valuable items that held national significance, but no one knew how they did it. The public was in shock. The media went into overdrive. How could a group of boys from Alexandra, with no formal training and no real resources, pull off something so brazen? This wasn't a regular break-in. It was a direct attack on the country's power structure. If the second most protected home in the country wasn't safe, then no one was. Questions flooded the news. How did they get past the advanced security? Was it inside help? And most chillingly, how could a gang of teenagers carry out such a high-profile crime without leaving any trace? The media's frenzy escalated quickly, and soon all eyes were on the gang and their leader, William. The investigation into the robbery quickly focused on William and his gang. His name had come up in connection with several other crimes, but now, with the deputy president's house on the line, the authorities had their eyes locked on him. William was arrested, and for a brief moment, it seemed like justice would be served. But the case fell apart. There was no forensic evidence, no clear confession, and despite the pressure, there wasn't enough to hold him. Legal technicalities, loopholes in the system, meant that he was set free. To the public, it felt like a slap in the face. However, this wasn't just a small victory for the gang. William's arrest had a dark consequence, one that no one anticipated. With the police now watching him and his group, the knife gang found themselves under intense surveillance. It seemed like the walls were closing in. But the gang didn't care. They weren't going to stop. If anything, they grew bolder, more dangerous. The eyes of law enforcement only seemed to sharpen their focus. The gang knew how to operate in the shadows, and they continued to wreak havoc. Even though they were under the watchful eye of the police, they weren't backing down. In 2006, the knife gang made a critical mistake. During a robbery at a high-end estate, something went wrong. One of the victims managed to escape, running for help before the gang could escape into the night. It was a rare slip-up. But in that mistake, they left behind something that would change everything: a knife with a distinctive handle. It wasn't a regular blade. It stood out, unique enough that it could be traced. For the first time in their reign of terror, the gang left behind a clue, a piece of the evidence that could finally lead to their capture. The authorities seized on the opportunity. The knife was tested, and its origin was tracked. It led them to a local supplier, and from there, a trail began to form. The problem, however, was that the gang was still operating in the shadows. They didn't leave enough to be caught, and William, still not fully under the law's grasp, remained a step ahead. Every piece of evidence seemed to slip through the cracks. With the trail getting warmer, the authorities were closing in, but the gang was still on the move, relentless in their mission. Yet, the public could sense it. The knife gang's reign was nearing its end, and the entire nation was holding its breath. They had crossed a line with the deputy president's robbery, but the people could only wait, hoping the authorities would catch up with them. The gang's escape was getting narrower, but they had proven time and again that they could slip through the smallest of gaps. And now, with the world watching, every new crime felt like one more step toward a final, inevitable confrontation. Would they be caught, or would the knife gang manage to evade justice once again? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as their terrifying crime spree continued. The police were closing in. The breakthrough came when investigators traced the distinctive knife left behind at the robbery to a store in Alexandra. CCTV footage from the store clearly showed one of the gang members buying the knife, and this was the clue that would unravel the tightly knit criminal web of the knife gang. As authorities dug deeper, informants from Alexandra, the heart of the gang's territory, began to talk. These whispers painted a clear picture of a network of safe houses and hideouts across the townships, where the gang members were hiding in plain sight, untouchable by the police up until this point. Weeks of silent surveillance followed. Police officers, operating in the shadows, mapped out every move the gang made, every home they visited, and every connection they had. The knife gang was always one step ahead, constantly moving, constantly shifting. Their ability to remain unnoticed while operating in such a large, complex area like Alexandra was a testament to their meticulous planning. But the police were growing closer. They knew this couldn't go on forever, and they were determined to bring the infamous gang to justice. In 2007, the time finally came. Armed with enough evidence and intelligence from their surveillance, the police coordinated a well-planned raid on one of the gang's known safe houses in Soweto. William, now the notorious leader of the knife gang, was captured there, along with two of the brothers. It was a significant blow to the gang, but it wasn't over yet. The remaining two brothers, still free, were on the move, heading to another hideout. Weeks later, they were apprehended as well, marking the end of the knife gang's reign of terror. For the public, it was a moment of relief after all. These were the same boys who had terrified Sandton's wealthiest and most powerful residents. But the story took an unexpected turn in the courtroom. As the gang members were brought in for their bail application in Wynberg, no one expected the chaos that would unfold. The judge, after reviewing the case, denied the gang members bail. As soon as the decision was made, something shocking happened. The gang members, still shackled, suddenly charged across the courtroom. They knocked over people in their frantic rush towards the exit. 3 of them were quickly tackled by security, but William and one of his brothers managed to escape. Even with their legs shackled by heavy chains, they ran through the courthouse and vanished into the night, leaving police and security scrambling in their wake. The escape sent shockwaves through the authorities. How had they managed to break free while still shackled? The police began to suspect that someone within the system had helped them, either by tipping them off about the raid or sabotaging their transport security. The possibility of inside help rattled the entire force. The public, already on edge, now questioned the integrity of the justice system. How could a gang so dangerous and elusive continue to slip through the fingers of the police time and time again? The escape turned the heat up on the investigation. Authorities now had to contend with the pressure of finding William and his brother before they could disappear once again. The media frenzy intensified, with every update on the search feeding into the growing public anxiety. Families in Sandton, especially, had been living in constant fear of these thieves. Now that they had escaped, the worry was palpable. Had they truly evaded capture for good? Would they continue to terrorize the wealthy elite of the area? The police were relentless. They tightened their surveillance, raided the homes of family members, and followed up on every lead. It wasn't long before they got a break. In Tembisa, a BMW was stopped by the police in a routine roadblock. William, along with a woman and a driver, was inside the car. The police arrested him on the spot, finally putting an end to his brief period of freedom. The woman was charged with assisting a fugitive, while the driver was released after questioning. This arrest was a major victory for the authorities, but the damage had already been done. The fear and tension William and his gang had stirred up in Sandton would not easily fade. The capture of William and his gang members was a bittersweet moment. While it marked the end of their reign of terror, it also left a lingering question. How had they managed to carry out such an audacious escape in the first place? The authorities celebrated their success, but there was no denying the blow to their reputation. The knife gang had outwitted them once more, and that fact would hang over the police force like a dark cloud for years to come. A massive manhunt had begun, and the authorities were on high alert. The police were desperate to bring down William and his gang, who had terrorized Sandton's wealthiest streets for years. They raided known associates, scoured safe houses, and relentlessly tracked every lead. The search had stretched on for weeks, and yet William had remained elusive. The fear of being caught hung over him, but he was always one step ahead until fate intervened. The break came when William's sister was arrested. She had been caught with stolen clothes, items linked directly to the gang's heists. Under questioning, she claimed that her brother had bought them for her, a feeble excuse that didn't fool anyone. The connection between the stolen goods and William was undeniable. Her arrest added another layer to the investigation, revealing just how deeply the gang had infiltrated the lives of those around them. Still, William was nowhere to be found, and the hunt continued with increasing urgency. Then, in 2007, the moment the authorities had been waiting for arrived, but it wasn't the result of a tip-off or a covert operation. It was pure chance. A routine roadblock in Tembisa turned into the breakthrough the police had been praying for. Officers stopped a BMW on suspicion of something minor, and as they approached the vehicle, they were stunned by who they found inside. William, his girlfriend, and a driver. There was no chase, no resistance, just an arrest made without a fight. It was almost anticlimactic after years of evasion. The fear that had gripped the city of Sandton now began to dissipate as the gang leader was finally in handcuffs. William's girlfriend was arrested as well, facing charges of aiding and abetting a fugitive. She had been with him throughout his time on the run, but now she would have to answer for her involvement. The driver, a man unaware of the gang's criminal activities, was released after questioning. The arrest was smooth, but it marked the beginning of the end for the knife gang. With William now in custody, the police could finally begin to dismantle the gang's operations piece by piece. The arrest sent waves of relief through Sandton. For years, the residents of this affluent area had lived in fear, knowing that at any moment they could be the next victims of the knife gang's ruthless crime sprees. But with William behind bars, the streets were quiet once again. The fear that had once paralyzed the wealthy suburb was replaced with a sense of calm. The people of Sandton could finally breathe easy, their fortified homes no longer necessary to keep the ghost-like gang at bay. The long nightmare had ended. However, in Alexandra, the reaction was far from unanimous. For some, William and his gang had become legends, symbols of defiance against a system that had long neglected their community. To those who had grown up alongside them, the gang was a sign of power, boys from the poverty-stricken streets of Alex who had dared to take from the rich. Their rise to notoriety was seen as a victory, however short-lived, over the inequality they faced. Yet the streets of Alexandra were divided. Some mourned the loss of the gang's power, while others, exhausted by years of crime, felt a sense of relief that the nightmare had finally ended. In 2008, William was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The court's decision was clear. No matter the circumstances of his upbringing, his crimes would not go unpunished. The sentence was a stark reminder that crime, regardless of its roots, would have consequences. William, once the feared leader of the knife gang, was now just another inmate behind bars. No parole, no second chances. His time in prison was set. His legacy of terror had come to a definitive end. For the public, the arrest of William and his gang signaled the end of a dark chapter in South African criminal history. The boys who had once haunted the wealthiest streets of Sandton, leaving behind a trail of fear and uncertainty, were now nothing more than a memory. Their reign had ended not in legend, but in chains. The city could finally return to its normal day-to-day life, no longer under the shadow of the knife gang's terror. The streets of Sandton, once a battleground, were now peaceful once again. The boys from Alexandra, who had dared to rise against the system, had fallen, and their legacy would be nothing more than a reminder of how far crime can take you before it all comes crashing down. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.